Today I am going to discuss very significant points about John Milton. John Milton is in our syllabus and it is very significant writer, and most often, almost every time, one question is compulsory. So let's discuss, because these are certain very significant facts I am going to give you, and if you are able to listen this video till the end, you will be able to understand many more facts which are very significant from the examination point of view. So let's start. See, I will be reading and then in between will give explanation also. So these are the facts which I am sharing with you. Milton does not belong strictly to the period conventionally identified as the Renaissance. Nevertheless, the diverse strain of thought and practice that are labeled as Renaissance had a lasting impact on Milton and may be seen in many of his writings. Some of the main political and social transformations of the period, which will be identified in broad terms. Milton's writing thus indicate a confluence of diverse factors, and in which not just Renaissance elements but emergent trends in literature and culture are also woven together. Now about Milton. The Renaissance is the term commonly used by historians to refer the periods in European history dating from the late 14th century in Italy, spreading to other countries through the 15th and 16th century, and probably reaching its culmination in 17th century England with the work of John Milton, often referred as the last great Renaissance poet. So remember, Milton is referred as last great Renaissance poet. It is difficult briefly to encapsulate the many, sometimes contradictory historical trends and that constitute this period, and even more difficult to identify commonalities that would justify their conclusion under a single period labeled as Renaissance. But if we were to attempt a broader sketch with our focus specially on the upper and learned classes of the different places on their intellectual and cultural production and developments, some running themes may be recognized. These suggest a porous but identifiable coherent period that may be considered significant if only the sake of convenience in arriving at intellectual history of period. Some of these themes are as follows. So we can simply say that he is considered to be the last significant Renaissance period, because his ideas, his writings are very significant, and they are coming equal to the terms of a scientific temperament. So classical learning, which is having significant impact on his writing. Classical learning, perhaps the most striking feature of Renaissance, was a revival and popularization of classical learning. This began with the discovery and new interest in writing of ancient Greeks, producing scholarship and added to the widespread Latin scholarship of the Middle Ages. It was aided in its popularization to no small extent by advent of a printing press. Printing press time is somewhere, it's a question mark, but 1450 we can say, which was to transform the range and reach of the intellectual and cultural world subsequently. This scholarship led to the development and centering of intellectual attention to human rather than divine objects, celebrating the virtue and potential of human individual and the discourse of humanism and consequently of individualism. So two things we are able to get right now: humanism and individualism. So first of all, as a human we are valuable, and then what is our individuality? How do we think ourselves as a human being? So humanism and individualism. This is very significant. Okay, then rather than divine objects. So talking ourselves as a collective, or maybe part of a community or society, or maybe blessed with divine grace, it is more significant for us to understand the main idea is, as a human being we are treated as humans, and moreover as an individuals. Okay, so intellectual and subsequently this scholarship led to the development and centering the intellectual attention on human rather than divine objects, celebrating the virtue and potential of human individual and discourse of humanism, consequently of individualism, both of which we shall be we will discuss later on. Then the Reformation. Mostly during this time you will find that the Reformation is talked. What is this Reformation? So another important factor in determining the course of European Renaissance was upheaval in Christianity, that is referred as Reformation. This began as a series of attacks on institution of Roman Catholic Church and proliferation of breakaway sects and cults. Martin Luther, we know Martin Luther 1480 through to 1546. Martin Luther, we know how he brought a revolution and a significant change in the church. So was probably the most influential in Florence of such rejection of the church during this period. The many ecclesiastical schools is generated with Christianity are together referred as Protestantism. Most of these were premised on the fundamental observation that the path to salvation did not lie through church, which stood accused of substantial corruption in its belief and its institutional practices. But though individuals of acceptance of the adherence to the Holy Scripture, salvation was, you remember this film PK, in which he says that, when he is going to that Baba and then he's trying to get his the ball, and then he says that you are denying God, because PK was raising question about God, and then you said that you are denying God and you are an atheist, you are a non-believer. Then PK said that which God? The question is which God? So the God who created us, the God who takes us as his children, or the God which is created by religious institutions. So that's the question is also raised by Martin Luther. So this Martin Luther is saying that there is no need, there is no mediation between somebody, between God and us. So we don't need any mediation. We can directly connect to God. So if you want to understand God, directly read Bible, Quran or Gita and any of the religious text, rather than Zend Avesta, or rather than depending on the interpreters. So that's what Martin Luther's 1483 to 1546 was probably the most influential in the affluence of such a rejection of the church during this period. The many ecclesiastical schools is generated within Christianity are together referred to Protestantism. So this Protestant means what is the existing order is there, which is moreover interpretation, and the religious authorities have become more dominant than anything else. So that is why protest for that. We do not believe the established order, which is more corrupt and based on mediation. Most of these were premised on the fundamental observation that the path to salvation did not lie through the church. Okay, this is a significant point. The path to salvation did not lie through the church, which stood accused of substantial corruption in its belief and its substantial practices, institutionalized practices, but through the individual acceptance of the adherence to Holy Scriptures. And this is what the same thing, this challenging the institutionalized practices of the religion. Buddha also did the same thing. He also challenged the existing order, which was moreover interpretation rather than direct connection to God. Salvation was thus a matter of individual direct, unmediated relation to God. The Reformation and the consequent counter-reformation within the Catholic Church led to several extended wars, political turmoil, and intra-state conflicts that last well into the 17th century across Europe and Britain. While battled as religious wars, these conflicts were fluently about political power and control of the state, with the Protestant ideologies finding special appeal with emerging bourgeoisie across Europe seeking a wide withered political say and greater autonomy in the trade and usury, and traditionally frowned up the Catholic Church. So the emergence of imperialism. The emergence of European, especially British imperialism, though not often considered integral to understanding the Renaissance, may actually be seen as its economic underpinning. A consumerate the expansion of intellectual discourse was the European discovery of various new continents and countries on globe. One of the most significant of these being our Americas. Trade and the settling exploitation of these places substantially enriched the European nations. Beside opening out the horizons of imagination to new geographies of the people, both these forms of enrichment of the economy and of the imagination provided the necessary prerequisite for the flourishing of art and culture that is characterized of the period of Europe. So that's how the emergence of colonialism is also significant. The new cosmology. The cosmology of the Middle Ages has been firmly Ptolemaic, envisioning the earth at the center of several centric ecclesiastical spheres. Within the publications of Copernican theory in 1543. Remember Copernicus, Copernicus, proposing a heliocentric universe with the earth as one among many planets in orbit around the sun. This becomes deeply controversial, though its real impact was felt only several decades later. It was sufficiently controversial of Milton for Milton to refer it in his work, and even at that time indicate the increasing inroad made by scientific discourses and methods to these domains of knowledge traditionally held by religion. So if you see the religious interpretation of our planet system is different, where the earth is in the center and the rest of the planets are moving around earth. But now the Copernicus discovered, and there are many other scientists who discover that there is a whole system, and earth is also one of the planet, and earth is revolving around sun. So that is why, and but the religion is, religious interpretation is something different, and that's how then we find the contradictions and conflict is there. Certainly, but we have this scientific impact too much on Milton. That is what his writing suggests. Certainly, all these factors are still evident at the time Milton was writing. However, his period is also marked by simultaneous presence of several new historical trends that actually come to define the following age. The age of enlightenment, which spans the latter part of the 17th century and much of the 18th century. Chief among these are the celebrations of reason, scientific method in pursuit of knowledge, and the pursuit of discovery of civic rationality that attempted to explore the outline, the relation of individual society. Now these points are very significant, and that is for this reason I am repeating. What is this? You need to remember the pursuit of discovery of the civic rationality, and before that, celebration of reason. Now earlier everything was based on faith, and when the faith, we talk about faith, belief, we don't question, no reasoning, no logic is there. Here we find that celebration of reason, everything you question, and if you find it properly answered on the basis of scientific theories, then you have to believe. So questioning, logic, the scientific methods in pursuit of knowledge. If you want to know anything, use the science base, and pursuit of discovery of civic rationality that attempt explore and outline the rationales of individual to the society. The last was manifested largely through the relatively new popularization of genre of political and cultural criticism, of which Milton was an early and powerful exponent. In his poetry too, these elements of the emerging age are engaged with, albeit circumspectly. The power of reason is explored, for instance, book 1 of Paradise Lost. Okay, so remember, the power of reason is explored, for instance, in book 1 Paradise Lost. In Satan's attempt to rationalize his fall from heaven and consequences for him. So the Satan is questioning and in trying to put things on a basis of reasoning. The engagement with science is evident in Milton's metaphor and similes more than though the actual employment of the new scientific discourse and methods. And while the whole Paradise Lost may be read as an early attempt to grapple with the complexities of the rational between individual and state, individual and God, and individual and society, the possibility of a civic rationality are inevitably renounced in favor of the more Renaissance trait of celebrations of human as divine being rather than a rational being. In the poem we will be examining, it is this theme that appears to preoccupy Milton's more than rationality, as the poem like El Allegro and El Penseroso. Milton may thus be seen to occupy a transitional period in history between the two ages, being in his work the defining intellectual and cultural traits of both. So he is actually from that old system to new system. He is shifting, and that's what he is representing. Nevertheless, it appeals to be more appropriate to associate with Renaissance. In fact, identify with him the last major Renaissance writer with enlightenment because of his own learning towards the intellectual preoccupations and positions of that early period. To speak of him as a representative of later Renaissance, which can now identify as approximately the period from early to middle decades of 17th century, would thus be reasonably accurate. The peculiar position he occupies nevertheless need to be further understood in the light of political and historical circumstances of writing, which we will now explore. The political and social context. Following the death of Elizabeth in 1603, these are the facts you can remember for your net exam also. The death of Elizabeth in 1603. The English throne passed from Tudor hands to Stuart of Scotland, with the Scottish King James IV, who took the title of James I of England as well. His reign. So James I is, James IV is same as James I. His reign lasted till 1625 as referred to the Jacobean period. So James I period is known as Jacobean period. In English history, it was witnessed in several major transformations in English society, perhaps the most important being the gradual alienation of the court from its increasingly insistent and demanding subjects, and the king from an increasingly Puritan parliament. Population increased sharply, almost doubling in this period, and increased at the consumerate with steeply rising prices and rents at a concomitant fall in real wages. Poverty was widely evident and at a new high, leading to social unrest and rapid dissolutions of traditions form of social revolution, the relations between class and rank. English society, even under Elizabeth, had begun seeing the emergence of new trading middle classes and landed gentry that began to invest more and more in trade and commerce. These sections aggressively challenged existing order of social rank and hierarchy with strong Puritan support. The nobility increasing financial dependence on social sections outside their own rank, rendering and crown politically dominant but vulnerable. Charles I, who followed James I in 1625, established a reign of decadent opulence and arbitrary power that was intended to reflect great power and glory, but succeeded only in gradually eroding his moral and political authority, feeding accusations against him of Catholic sympathies and then demands for substantial curbs in royal power, especially from the increasing powerful Puritans who dominated the House of Commons. In Parliament, 1641, a civil war has erupted between royalists and the forces within alliances to the leaders of the House of Commons who had challenged the king's power. Under Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell, the new model army of the Commonwealth successfully gained a superiority, eventually leading to the capture and subsequent execution several years later, Charles I in 1649. This fact is very significant. You all remember for your net exam also, Charles was executed in 1649. And the declaration of England as a republic name Commonwealth. Now the English name England's name has changed as a republic or the Commonwealth. This did not end civil war in England. However, mistrust and antagonism amongst the members of the parliament eventually led to Commonwealth use of his army to disband parliament on charge of corruption. He then took over direct rule of England, Ireland and Scotland and Lord Protector of the realm in 1653. Ruling till his death of 1658, the Charles I, and even that had shocked both Catholic and Protestant sentiments across Europe, however, had a lasting impact, resulting in repeated challenges to the legitimacy of Cromwell's government. The Commonwealth's reign he established was eventually dissolved by Charles II, who had ecclesiastically fought Commonwealth from exile in France and was invited to reassume power in England 1660 by the remaining member of the parliament. But it was only with the glorious revolution of 1688. This is also a question for NET. Glorious revolution of 1688. You see, if you see the old question set of a NET exam, then you will find these questions are there. Glorious revolution 1688, then the reign of Commonwealth, and Charles first death. These are the significant questions. That it was finally established that parliament would be the supreme political authority to whose mandate even the king would have to submit. So here if we see the power of parliament and Commonwealth, and Oliver Cromwell is becoming very significant. This period of deep strife and civil unrest in England may be seen then as essentially the moment of political and social transition in which the power of the king became subject to examination and regulation by an increasingly powerful civil body, the parliament. These changes were welcomed by the new trading and mercantile sections who fought in the name of religion for great political economic autonomy. Along with these changes at the level of the visible political structure, English society was also witnessing radical transformation. With the gradual colonization of the Americans and expansion of trade, towns and cities became major centers of concentration of finance and labor, permitting the quick popularization of various strands of Puritanism like Diggers and Quakers, espousing radical new proto-socialist ideas and consequently fomenting a civil unrest. In different ways, these religious ideologies challenges the existing order and conventions of rank, ecclesiastical and political authority. Attitudes to private property and very importantly to the relation between the sexes. Women took an active part in civil unrest. Remember, this is a significant point. Women took active part in civil unrest, with several emerging as powerful Puritan preachers. Their presence in an until now male-dominated public space was a powerful challenge to patriarchal dispensation, even if this was not their specific intent. Much literature of the period turned from these diverse challenges to the still dominantly feudal patriarchal worldview, often taking the form of pamphleteering and political treatises of the and tracts. Like some of Milton's work and sought to influence public opinion and thereby being that political and social changes. That these were set essentially in the terms of religion debate should not bind us to deeply political intentions and implications of the debate itself. The dominant theme was the question of the autonomy and religious rights, political, religious, economic and individual in relation to existing form of authority, whether state, church or social conventions, and its formulations drew heavily on both Renaissance and Reformation discourses of humanism and individualism. So this, I think HI, humanism and individualism, you can remember very well in many ways, and now we see the presence of women also. Okay, and that's what I'm having pink pencil. This question is the heart of Milton's Paradise Lost. So that's how we see all these impacts are there in the Paradise Lost, right? Okay, then and of the other literary forms of the period was focus on religious issues. Nevertheless, humanist influences, ideas and concern of high Renaissance left a lasting impact. Many of the genres that become prominent in this period are verse, satire, epigrams, essays, and meditations and mosque, and the tragic comedy and pastoral plays. So these are the new genre of literature coming, and I repeat, satire, epigram, essays, meditations, mosque, tragic comedy, pastoral play were imports from Europe as part of the baggage of Renaissance influence in England. Another feature of this period with bearing one kind of literature is produced was proliferations of schools and promotions of education in the classical languages, literature and discipline like logic and rhetoric. So logic, rhetoric, when you have to remember the time period of Milton, logic, rhetoric, humanism, individualism, and then many of the different genres of the writings are coming with an emphasis on memorizing. Writers would thus draw extensive allusions to the earlier work, knowing their readers would recognize them, indicating a highly restricted but homogeneous culture. Much of this writing was in Latin, and writing in England, English was either largely experimental or translations of continental writers, at least in poetry. While Elizabethan like Spenser, Sidney, RAAG did write very successfully English verse, and they remained substantially indebted to continental, specifically Italian and French writing. It is in the words of John Donne, 1572 to 1631. We all know John Donne is a very significant writer, that an entirely different, particularly English sensibility become evident. Playful, even irreverent, sometimes deliberately shocking, but always retaining a degree of seriousness and close attention to poetic craft. Later, literary historians were to label the kind of writing practiced by Donne and some of his contemporaries and successors, Ben Jonson, George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, Andrew Marvell, metaphysical poetry. So this metaphysical poetry, concept of metaphysical poetry is typically associated with John Donne and rest of his contemporaries, Ben Jonson, George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, Andrew Marvell, and they are associated with the metaphysical poetry. Alluding to its often abstract and strikingly unlikely figure of speech, Milton too explored the short lyric in poems like El Allegro and El Penseroso. Before he essayed on epic Paradise Lost, although his own style tended towards the classical form and theme, the dominant poetry of the period was thus the short lyric. In theatres, the Jacobean reign saw the picking of popular theatre and its waning following repeated Puritans' attack on its licentious and promoting vice. The tragedies and mosques of the Caroline court were the most common forms that were performed, and both employs metrical verse in dialogue. With the closure of the theatre and a growing strength of Puritans, prose in form of meditations, pamphlets, essays and tracts became a major literary vehicle by the mid-17th century. Much of this, as we have noted, centers on the issues of religion and the state. The literature of the period was also influenced by the new scientific method of inquiry pronounced by Sir Francis Bacon, by the pursuit of the scientific knowledge, and that is accelerated and scientific discoveries like those of the Copernicus and Galileo. And we have already talked about Copernicus discovery, and it accelerated by the scientific discoveries like those of Copernicus and Galileo. It makes an often playful appearance in the period of metaphysical, and but its lasting influence as challenge it was through a religious perceptions of the world. Milton's famous line in the invocation of the Paradise Lost, asserting that his epic was justify the way of God to man. That's what we always know. What is Paradise Lost? The justify the ways of God to man. Justify the ways of God to man may thus be understood in terms of either the legalistic discourse of the conflict between the kind and parliament of that of answering the challenge of scientific inquiry on both. The sentiments of Jacobean tragedy and its vehicle or metrical verse also had a lasting impact on poetry, judging from the prolific number of now little known attempts to write the first English epic in metrical verse. While several poets attempted the long narrative on the epic form, Patrick Henry's Serentine and Mariana 1622, D. Advent's epic form, Advent's that is Gondy Bird 1650, and W. Chamberlain's Pharaohnida 1659, to name just a few. None really succeeded till Milton. It is reasonable to argue that one reason for Milton's success was his use of epic form to represent the contemporary struggle between religion and the state as itself an epic struggle, rather than confining himself to simply reconstructing the form and its conventional classic theme in English and its own sake. That is, Milton rendered the epic topical and contemporary. So, this point I again repeat, it is reasonable to argue that one reason for Milton's success was in its use of epic form to represent the contemporary struggle between religion and state. Okay, so the struggle is there between religion and state. It's an epic topic, it's an epic issue that is represented in an epic style. So that's why its use of epic in writing Paradise Lost. Okay, thus Milton rendered the epic topical and contemporary while retaining its formal classical moorings. One dimension of the epic contemporaneity is its negotiations with current debate on gender, a problem that was thrown up for Puritan patriarchy in its promotion of individualism was that opens up question of women's individuality and autonomy. The resolution of this demand and engagement with biblical notion of free will and of the culpability of women in the fall from grace. Milton engaged in his poetry with these issues in some detail in speeches between Adam and Eve in Paradise Lost. So that's how we have to understand. So these and very, very significant points we could talk in this discussion. I hope you would like it, and we'll continue. We'll take this idea further, because now it's almost half an hour of this video is there. You listen it carefully, repeat it, and then write the wonderful answer. So these are some of the books which I can mention for you. That is Dennis Albini's New Science, New World. Then Dennis Danielson, that is the Cambridge Companion to Milton. Martin J. Evans, The Miltonic Moments. Then Stephen Fallon, Stephen Fallon, Milton Among the Philosophers, Poetry and Materialism in 17th Century England. Then S. Chan Acha Guibori, Ceremony and Community for Her Birth to Milton. Milton Literature, Religion and Cultural Conflict in 17th Century England. Then Christopher Hill, Milton and English Revolution. Barbara Kiefer Livolsky, Protestant Poetics and 17th Century Religious. Then Lee Marcus, Editing the Renaissance, Shakespeare, Marlowe, Milton. And then John Roger, The Matter of Revolution, Science, Poetry and Politics in the Age of Milton. Andrew Shiflett, Eric Andrews Shiflett, Stoic Politics and Literature in the Age of Milton. War and Peace Reconciled. Michael Wilding, Dragon's Teeth, Literature in the English Revolution. So these are the significant books which you can refer, and we'll continue the series. All the best. Listen it again and again, share, subscribe and like, and write a beautiful comments about this.